kind of God not to let us blow through growth barriers, that we grow slowly and grow in stages. Because as we grow, we learn to be dependent upon God. Think of the hurdles that you have hit in your life. As much as I hated them at the time, as painful as they were at the time, whether it was something physical in my life or thinking of my spiritual growth in my life, as I look back upon them, I'm glad that God put them there because I learned something from them and it helped me mature as either a person or personally and spiritually. And it's a wonderful thing. What does Paul talk about? Paul talks about in his epistles a thorn that Christ had given him, something that he had given him so he didn't get too proud. And I think God grows us in stages so we don't get too proud, that we learn to be dependent upon Him. All right? So as leaders, including everyone in here, as leaders, part of our job is to help other people grow, to help this church grow in steps and layers and stages, but to help other individual people mature in their faith in steps and layers and in stages. But as we do that, it's essential then as we help others grow and help this church grow, that we take responsibility for our own spiritual growth. Again, everything rises and falls on leadership. Leadership rises and falls on followership. So how close are you? How close am I? How close are we as a church willing to follow Christ? I think that's what this hinges on. How close are we willing to follow Christ? Okay? Anybody have any questions on that? I know we're going through this really fast. We went through this in probably 3 hours. I've had to condense it into, 20 minutes. So we're flying through it. You may need to go home and reflect upon it. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that here, a lot more of that here in the next section. And how many of you, when you came to Christ, I hope everybody in here knows Christ, but who popped out a totally mature Christian? We don't do that. We mature as people, as Christians, slowly, and we develop. And the same is true as the church. Why? Because the church is made up of Christians as well. So let's move on to leadership gravity. And again, I include everybody really in this leadership gravity, but it also goes for the whole church. Definition then. This isn't a great definition. It's more of a description. If you want to fly, you have to build a rocket or an airplane. If you want to fly, rocket's going to fit better. If you want to fly, you have to build a rocket. If you want to fly, you have to build a rocket. The laws of gravity are out there. Newton and his apple, whether that was a true story or not. We can all test gravity by jumping up, and does anybody just stay up in the air? Maybe Michael Jordan a little bit longer than we do. But we all Michael Jordan's probably getting dated. We're all a little older in here, but you talk to younger generations, and they probably don't know who he is. But we jump up and we come right back down. But we also know that just by looking up in the sky, that the laws of gravity will also let us fly. That we can get planes up there. We can get rockets up there. Birds get up there. So the laws of gravity will allow us to fly. But first we have to learn the laws of gravity that God put into place. And we all have to learn how to operate within the laws of gravity that God puts into place. Now here's where we get into a little bit more. I think we all, to some point, I know I as a pastor, we as pastors, I don't know what the percentage is. It's incredibly high. But in the United States, the vast majority of churches are 100 people or under. And I don't want to get into why that is. It's not that all churches are destined to be small. I think that would be a total misunderstanding of who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to be as Christians. But the vast majority of churches are small. And typically, small church pastors get sent or books get sent to conferences that are put on by huge churches, mega churches. And then we go home and say, man, what in the world did they do? How can I replicate what they do to get my church to that size? And we get into all sorts of problems by doing that. And what was explained to me, and which makes a lot of sense to me, and that's what I'm going to share with you now, is that there are some leaders in some churches that just tend, or by God's blessing, operate outside the laws of gravity. I don't know why God does what he does. I don't know why God blesses whom he blesses, and why God gives certain gifts to certain people. But some people, and we all know this, not necessarily in the church, but we all know people who just seem to just be so far out there that it's like we don't even compare to them. And it's not that they're weird, but we know people whose skills and whose maybe knowledge or their intelligence or their charisma is so high, it's like they're not subject to the laws of gravity. Does everybody know somebody like that? Whether it's in your workplace or a family member or another pastor. Does anybody know people like that? You're like, man, God has really gifted them in ways that he has not gifted me or the 99% of the rest of the world. Okay, so we all can kind of relate to that, okay? So, getting back to churches and to pastors, 1% probably or less of churches operate beyond these laws of gravity. We look out and it seems like everything they do turns to gold. They're out there floating around and it's just amazing. They just seem to operate beyond the laws of gravity. Those churches, those people, those leaders grow in leaps and bounds. Okay? Those grow in leaps and bounds. Whereas the rest of us, the 99%, the ones that God has still gifted just differently, grow in what? Layers and stages. So it would be a complete mistake then to look at these churches, to look at these pastors, to look at other people who God has just gifted them to operate beyond the laws of gravity, to operate in leaps and bounds, and to say, we need to be like them, we need to lead like them, when we can't. We just can't. God hasn't blessed us that way. God hasn't designed us that way. We operate according to the laws of gravity, and we grow instead in layers and leaps, okay? But here's the thing. Because remember, this is all in context of Kevin at 12 stone, who's in a church of 12,000, okay? And he's talking about these layers and stages. So here's your next one. Give a church enough time, and growth in layers will look like growth in leaps. Give a church enough time who operates according to the laws of gravity, according to what God has given them. Growth in layers will look like growth in leaps. So you look at this church, 12 Stone, they've got 12,000 people. Holy mackerel. They are doing something that we need to emulate and to copy. God is just blessing them. But you go back and you actually hear the story, and it was a long, hard road of 24 years. They grew in stages. They went backwards. There's a big church in Minneapolis. It's called Church of the Open Door. I think there's 7,000 people. The pastor there said, the first Sunday I got there, we were running 500, and in a year I grew that church to 150. They went backwards. But God does things that we have no idea what He's doing. And for the majority of us, He grows us in layers and in stages. So let's look. 4 lessons of leadership gravity. I'm over time, so I'm going to have to fly through this. Growth takes sweat, number 1. And again, I didn't say this, but the reason I am sharing this with you this morning and is because it emphasizes that we, as New Heights Christian Fellowship, are on the right track. I'm not a guy who goes to seminars I hate going to seminars anyway, I've already said that. But I don't go to seminars and say, wow, here's a new program that we can implement. I'm going to run back to New Heights and we're going to do something different. And then I run back another year and come back next year and say, here's another program. We're going to switch everything we've got and try this. And then another year down the road, come back and say, here's another program we're going to try and this is going to get us on track. No, that's not me. We're on the right track. This church has the right vision. We're going in the right direction, and this is the reason I share this with you this morning, is because it's a vote of confidence that New Heights Christian Fellowship is headed in the right direction. Okay? So we're about making conversions and making disciples here at New Heights Christian Fellowship, reaching our community. But doing that takes hard work. It takes sweat. Reaching lost people is hard because they do not want to be found. Reaching lost people is hard work because they don't want to be found. There is no magic bullet. It takes hard work, okay? And here's the thing. Why do so many churches not grow? Why do they not reach people like they're supposed to? They give up. Who said that, Paulette? That's really good. That's actually not the answer I'm looking for, but that's a perfect answer. We're going to get to that actually here in another couple of blanks. Because I think we're not willing to put in the hard work that it takes to do what Christ has told us to do. Okay? That's a really hard thing to say, but I think that's true. We're not willing to put in the sweat and the hard work that it takes to grow a church, okay? 2, think shrewdly. Do we know what we're doing? Do we know where we're headed? Do we know what our vision is as a church? And I think we do. We've talked about that. If you don't know, come see me afterwards and we'll talk about it. But we've got to be shrewd. What does it mean to be shrewd? Does anybody know? It's not a shrew. You don't want to be a shrew. But what's shrewd? Does anybody know what shrewd means? It's being sharp. It's being wise. It's being sly. It's being, as one person put it, ingenious and industrious. That we've got to be creative. How do we take something that's very old, 2,000, 6,000 years old, and make it fresh? It's not about newness. There's nothing new here. But how do we make it fresh? And it takes ingenuity and shrewdness to do that.